Hi, this is Brendan. I'm going to be reading my story, The Weight of Feathers. Ginseng switches on the reading lamp on his nightstand and gets into bed. He's cradling a scrambled Rubik's Cube in his hands, one with treasure chest printed on the center white tile. He found it at his grandmother's place after her cremation earlier. It was surreal standing by the door, looking at the old faded furniture that no longer belonged to anyone. Moving anything in the apartment felt wrong, as if everything Ginseng's grandmother owned needed time to forget her touch. He doesn't know why, but the unsolved cube resting on the couch seemed different. It felt like the only object he'd been allowed to touch, and so he brought it home. He remembers being able to solve it, though that was when he was 16, about 3 decades ago, because of a fact that swept most secondary schools in Singapore. Maybe the solution will come back to him as he fiddles with it. Wen Qing is on her phone, scrolling through Facebook on her side of the bed. She believes that being there with him, being there for him, is the least she can do to take over a share of his misery. It has been a long day. They lie awake, letting the lingering gloom bleed out of both of them. Hey, I have a riddle for you, Wen Qing says, briefly grinning at the glowing screen before turning to Ginseng. She places her phone down and tilts herself towards him. What is lighter, a ton of feathers or a ton of bricks? Feathers, I think. Ginseng replies, keeping his eyes on the cube. He twists it with a gentle touch, almost like he's afraid that it burst apart. That reminds me, Ginseng continues. Have I told you about history class in primary school? No, I don't think so. Still staring at the cube and still trying to solve it, he continues. Well, it happened when I was 11, I think, or 12. Miss Lim was probably in her 20s, young enough for all the boys to have a bit of a crush on her. She wasn't that good at teaching though, and always sounded like she was unsure about everything. She was saying how it's important to know our country's past. We didn't understand why, and given the lack of any explanation, neither did she. Then she went on to talk about the Japanese occupation. The Japanese commander was General Yamashita. Everyone erupted into laughter instantly. Yamashita, that became the running gag for the rest of the week. Miss Lim tried to get the class to settle down, but it was useless. None of us could pay any attention after that. During recess, many of us waited for the ideal opening to say, hey, I need to go take a Yamashita, and we did it, even if we didn't need to use the toilet, just to make ourselves appear cool, I guess. On Saturday, I went to Grandma's place with my parents. It was a weekly routine even back then, you know. Her place looked pretty much the same, and not much has changed over the decade. Heck, she was using the same CRT television even back then. She always kept the television on, but she didn't actually listen or watch it. I only found out years later when I stayed the night and learned that she couldn't sleep if the television wasn't on. I think for her, silence was louder than the sound from the television. She lived alone after all. Anyway, my parents were making lunch on Saturday and I was sitting beside Grandma on that old couch across the television. She was gentler and smiled more back then, though her short, wavy hair had been chalk white for as long as I remember. We were talking. Actually, it's mostly her asking the same few questions she asked every week. Have you eaten? Have you been behaving at home? Have you done your homework? Questions that connected her to me, even though we lived believing in very different Singapores. I always answered the way grandchildren do to earn affection with short, honest replies. Back then, every day was a saccharine blur of happiness, and homework was my only worry. I even believed that people could feel the same way I did if I radiate my emotions out. So I tried to will my joy into Grandma. In a way, we sort of stumbled our way into caring for each other. Then she asked, how was school? Oh, same, mom. Oh, history was fun. We learned about the Japanese occupation. And she froze up. At least, I think she did. No, she stopped asking any more questions. At that moment, I wasn't looking at her, so I kept on talking. The general has a really funny name. It was Yamashita. I was giggling like a damn idiot when I finally turned and looked at her. I swear, I saw her smile melt off her face. Her wrinkles, especially the ones at the corner of her eyes, slackened and became less defined, and she had to bite her lower lip so hard that part of it became pale. She was looking at me, but not really. She was looking somewhere past me, I think. Then she stood up and ambled towards the cabinet near the kitchen. Her wedding photo was there. It's a small black and white photo, the only photo she owned. Grandma was standing beside my grandfather in front of a shop house. Her in the white wedding dress and him in a tuxedo. They were looking directly at the camera with poker faces. She picked up the photo. There was a film of dust on it, and with her thumb she rubbed the dust off his face. I was still sitting on the couch, only able to see her back, her small hunchback. I don't remember why I sat there without doing anything or how long she stood there with the photo in her hands. Eventually, she put the photo down and walked back. Then she sat down, rubbed my head and smiled. The following week, we learned more about what happened during the occupation, the Suqing double tent incident, water torture, comfort women, and so on. Miss Lim read out the information to us the same way she teach long division. History was just another class sandwiched between science and mathematics. Just another subject I'd score highly in, so my parents would buy me toys. How the Japanese would bayonet the bodies one by one after shooting all of them. How they tortured innocents for information they didn't have. How they forced the hose down people's throats, filled them out with water, then stomped on their bellies. How they forced women away from their families to provide relief for their soldiers. All of that became facts I was accustomed to discarding right after the exams. I, in my arrogance, thought I knew evil. The Japanese were evil like Megatron and Mojo Jojo. 50,000 to 100,000 Chinese men died during the Suqing massacre. I quoted bits of information like that from the textbook to Grandma the same week. We were both on the couch. My dad was there, sitting cross-legged on the floor. He was definitely nervous when I started talking about all that, eyes darting from me to Grandma and back to me again. Junsing, it's fine, Grandma said in a soft tone while looking at me as she smiled and nodded slightly. But Ma, I'm fine, Boon. My dad sighed, then turned his attention to the television, trying to tune out what I was saying to Grandma. She let me ramble on and on and on. I thought I was doing something praiseworthy, thought that I was so smart just because I could recite the exact same words dictated to everyone in class. Then I mentioned how Lee Kuan Yew said to forgive but never forget. Forgetting, that's not a choice, she said as her eyebrows creased into the barest frown. She placed a hand on my shoulder and caressed it with her thumb. I was saying sometimes we can't even if you want to. Why? As a kid, I couldn't wrap my head around something so foreign. Even now, I still don't know how much pain it takes for someone to want that choice. You'll understand when you're older. Grandma forced a smile and brushed my hair back. She then grabbed a sheet of newspaper and tore two small, roughly square pieces out. Come, Asing, let me teach you how to fold a paper crane. That night back at home, my dad knelt down to my height and grabbed my shoulder. It was dark, and I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the tofu glint in his dark brown eyes. I don't remember what he said exactly, but I know he told me that grandfather passed away during the occupation. He didn't say how, and I never asked. I don't think he wanted me to probe. It was the way he hesitated, sighing after every few words, the way he broke eye contact and looked down every few seconds, the way every word came out so slow and measured. I was used to him simply telling me what I should do, yet there he was, struggling to find the right way to tell me something. His broad shoulders then didn't seem that much broader than mine when we were face to face. That was the first time he spoke to me not as a father, but as a person. Years later, in my late teens, I learned that my father had two older brothers. I heard their names when they talked with Grandma in Hokkien, which I was starting to understand before the Qingming festival. They passed away around the same time as my grandfather, I think, and they were almost never talked about, unless it was unavoidable, like when they needed to prepare the ritual offerings. Even then, it was always in harsh tones and only mentioned in conversations between my dad and Grandma. Even my mum would step back and keep her distance whenever their names were about to be brought up. All those years, I've been mindlessly lighting joysticks for them without knowing who they were. I only did it because I was told to, all while feeling annoyed at a custom I deemed meaningless. My dad never told me who they were, though I don't think he hid it from me on purpose. He probably thought that I wouldn't get how heavy their names were to him. I never cared enough to ask, to find out more. So maybe he was right. That proved his point, if he had one. Maybe that was why Grandma didn't tell me about my grandfather. That was when I realized that even if I knew the numbers and the statistics, I'll never know how deep the scars run. Maybe no one does. Maybe all they could do was count what they had lost until they lost count, or had to stop because of how much it hurt. With one final twist, Ginseng solves the cube. He pulls the top layer off and reveals the paper crane folded from an out-of-circulation $1 bill resting inside. I didn't even get to apologize to her. I didn't know I wanted to, no, needed to apologize to her. Ginseng holds the cube tight, bites the inner part of his lower lip, and turns to look at Wen Qing with his eyes glistening. Was my answer right, by the way? Yes, it was. Wen Qing says, in a voice softer than a whisper. Ginseng places the cube aside, covering his face in his hands. I didn't know anything, and it's too late now. Wen Qing pulls herself to Ginseng and hugs his trembling body. She reaches an arm past him and dims the reading lamp.